In Chapter 5, we are going to graph simple rational functions. And what we're going to do to start is we're going to look at the parent graph, which is y equals a divided by x minus h, and then we're going to add k. Now we've seen these parameters before with the parabola and other functions, and we're going to take a look at what they do today. We're going to graph these without using a graphing calculator. So the main thing is that we have this h value here, and when x equals h, that is your vertical asymptote. So we can easily find it without having to graph anything, because again, we're not going to be able to use the graphing calculator. So your vertical asymptote is going to be h. Now, if you look in the equation, it's x minus h. So if you want to think about taking the opposite of your h, that will be your vertical asymptote. So for example, if we had y equals 1 over x minus 2 plus 3, our vertical asymptote would be x equals 2. All right, the other parameter here we have is our k, and that is going to be the horizontal asymptote. Y equals k is the horizontal asymptote, and whatever that number is, that is the same thing. So in the example down below here, our y is going to be equal to 3 because that is our k value. So our h is the vertical asymptote and the k is the horizontal asymptote. All right, we also need to look at the domain and the range. So just to review, the x equals h is your vertical asymptote, y equals k is your horizontal asymptote, and when you go to do your domain, remember your domain is going from left to right on your graph, you're going to take your negative infinity to your h value, which is your vertical asymptote. We're going to have the union symbol, and then we'll go from the vertical asymptote to infinity. So the domain has two pieces to it. So it's negative infinity to your vertical asymptote. It's going to take a break there, and then after the vertical asymptote, it's going to pick back up again. Similar to your range, which is the bottom of the graph to the top, we're going to have negative infinity to our k, which is our horizontal asymptote, our union symbol, and then k to infinity. So same deal with the horizontal asymptote. It's going to take a break, and then it's going to pick back up again. So these are very easy to find as long as you can identify your h and your k. And then the a value is going to be, some kind of constant that you don't really have to worry about right now. The other thing that we're going to talk about is a locator point, and that is just your h and your k as an ordered pair. So the locator point is h comma k, and that is going to be the intersection of your asymptotes. So intersection of the vertical and the horizontal asymptotes. Let's take a look at example 2 from the notes. We have f of x equals 1 over x plus 3 minus 2. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to identify my h and my k. So my h is going to be negative 3, and my k is going to be negative 2. So I'm getting the k from that negative 2 that is in the k location, and my h, remember, it's going to be x minus h, so you're going to take the opposite of the number with your x in the denominator, which becomes a negative 3. So my locator point is going to be the ordered pair, negative 3 comma negative 2. And so I found my vertical asymptote, my horizontal asymptote. To abbreviate VA for vertical asymptote, x equals negative 3. Abbreviate horizontal asymptote with HA, y equals negative 2. And again, I'm getting these numbers from here. And then our domain is going to be negative infinity to our h, which is negative 3. Close the parenthesis with our union symbol, and then pick up at negative 3 to infinity. And then our range, negative infinity to negative 2, which is the horizontal asymptote, the union symbol, and then negative 2 to infinity. So once you know that h and that k, you can find your domain, your range, and both asymptotes. Here is the graph of the function f of x equals 1 over x plus 3 minus 2. I did graph it on the Desmos graphing calculator, and you will notice that you have your vertical asymptote at -3 here. So your function is getting very, very close to that. And then we have the horizontal at y equals -2. So we have the intersection there, and you can see in the graph both of them are getting very close, as this is going to get very close to your asymptotes as your function goes to infinity. We'll take a look at one more example. This is number 3 from the notes. F of x is equal to 2 over x minus 1 minus 4. So the first thing I'm going to do is find my h and my k. H is going to be 1 from here. K is -4 from here. So that means my vertical asymptote is x equals 1, because that's the h. My horizontal asymptote is y equals -4, because that's my k. My domain is going to be -infinity to 1, union 1 to infinity. So remember, your domain is associated with your vertical asymptote. Our range is associated with the horizontal asymptote. So -infinity to -4, union -4 to infinity. So the range is associated with the horizontal asymptote. And then I forgot to write that the locator point is going to be the ordered pair 1, -4. Here is an example of the graph. I used, again, the Desmos graphing calculator, and you will see that at 1 we have our vertical asymptote here, and then at -4 we have the horizontal asymptote.